I make it 7 o'clock, so let's get started. Welcome to this Worldwide Wednesdays hosted hustings for the European movement. We've got 4 candidates joining us. We're going to hear short presentations by the candidates. Then they're going to answer some questions which have been sent in by people from the European movement. We are recording this and the recording will be posted on the YouTube channel later on. So you will have a chance to go back and to perhaps review what the candidates have said. So my name's Paula Keaveney. I've agreed to moderate the hustings this evening. The 4 candidates we have are Molly Scott Cato, Nick Hopkinson, Sajjad Karim and Richard Wilson. So each candidate will speak for around 4 minutes, giving their ideas and vision for the organisation. There will then be some questions which I will read out, and each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer those. And then at the end, there will be a 2-minute sum up from each of the candidates. We will rotate the speaking orders, so each candidate will get at least 1 chance to speak first. I'll be keeping an eye on the time, and when we get to the 30-second warning for candidates, this will be the sound that they will hear, and when we get to the limit, I will cut them off. One of our candidates, Molly Scott Cato, is actually on a train, so there may be some times when she loses signal. That's not her being rude, it's just the way things are. And because of this, she has actually recorded her introductory statement. So I am going to ask Aidan to begin by playing Molly's statement. After that, we will go to Nick for a statement, to Saj for a statement, and to Richard for a statement.
Good evening. It's very nice to be with you in video format. I'm sorry I can't join you in person, but I have another engagement tonight. So my name's Molly Scott Cato, and I've been on the executive of the European movement for the past year. And prior to that, I was a member of the European Parliament representing the southwest of England and Gibraltar, and on behalf of the Greens EFA group in the European Parliament. So I'm now putting myself forward to be one of the vice chairs of the European movement, and I just wanted to share with you some of my reasons for doing that, and also some of my priorities for the European movement in the years ahead. So I think I was obviously despondent, like a lot of you, when when we didn't manage to stop Brexit. And I can remember coming back from Brussels on a train and just thinking, well, where do we go now? We need an organisation that's going to mobilise pro-European feeling in the country and take us back into the European Union. And it seemed clear to me that the European movement was that organisation. But at the same time, I wasn't terribly impressed by the way the European movement looked at that point. It seemed to represent a rather narrow section of pro-European views and of the country generally. And so I'm very happy to say that the European movement right now is an organisation in change. And I think it needed to change, and it's really changing and expanding very rapidly. So it's an exciting time to be part of the European movement. And I absolutely still believe that the European movement is the organisation that will take us back into the EU. So I'm determined that it stays broadly based and representative of the kind of people who will be voting in the referendum that will decide that we rejoin the EU. So I think that what we need to do is to obviously critique the Brexit that's happening now and all the disasters, and really make our voice loud in linking the disasters we're seeing, failure of abattoirs, not enough people working in care homes, shortage of petrol supplies, cancelling Christmas. It's just going to be an ongoing series of disasters until we face the reality that leaving the single market was a terribly bad idea. And I support this idea of a clear pathway back and step by step to return to the EU. And so I think, our job is to work out a clear and strategic communications path to share that view more widely. And I've worked with other leaders in the European movement to choose the staff that will be now developing our strategic communications together with people in the local branches and affiliated groups. So I think that's really my first priority, is to make sure that we have a clear sense of how we get back and really are authoritative about what that route looks like. But my second priority, and I think I've already made this clear in what I said at the start, is that we need to become a truly representative movement. And once Andrew became elected as our chair, he asked me if I would like to lead a diversity review. And having, considered that was one of the main blocks on the success of the European movement, I was very happy to do that. And we've made some clear proposals. And I can tell you that already the organization feels transformed in terms of the amount of power that women have, certainly. And now we're working hard to make sure that we overcome the sort of narrowness of our class base and also embrace people from a range of ethnic minority backgrounds so that we are representative of the whole community in the country. And my third priority is about keeping those good connections with our European neighbours. I think it's been really shocking how quickly relationships have deteriorated. And I think we've got an important role to play as a movement. We talk about ambassadors. Sometimes we talk about ambassadors meaning people that will go out to the country and talk to people in this country. Obviously, that's very important. But I think there's actually a diplomatic role that needs to be played, that the European movement can really help with, because we've got some extremely high profile and well-connected members and supporters. And I see them having a role that's actually about keeping those good relationships with the capitals of the other EU countries, because there is going to come a point when we need to negotiate our way back into membership. And we don't at the moment see any of our leading politicians really embracing that idea. And so relationships are very poor. And so I think there's a role for us in really having high-level meetings with leadership groups and pro-EU groups across the continent, so we have strong, friendly relationships for that stage when we move towards negotiating our way back into membership. So I'm signed up to doing what I can to make the European movement strong, to make it larger, to mobilize it, make it more energetic, and also make sure that it represents everybody in the country and also all the political views, all the political parties and all the pro-Europeans in all those political parties. So if that sounds like the kind of thing that you think would be good for the movement, then please do vote for me in the election for vice chair. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. If I could now ask Nick Hopkinson to give us up to 4 minutes of his vision for the organisation.
Thanks to Tim, Mary and the chair for convening this. I'm delighted to be with the European Movement Merseyside and many members nationwide. If you're not already an EM member, we hope this hour may encourage you to join. It may not sound like it, but I have strong Liverpool roots. My mother's family, the Rathbones, were prominent champions of good causes, including abolishing slavery, funding district nursing and education. My cause for decades has been to promote the benefits of EU membership. I'm delighted there's so much interest in serving as vice chair. This is the first time in a decade the positions have been contested. Briefly about me. Almost 25 years as a director, transforming the Foreign Office Policy Forum. Since 2011, I've been active in the EM, including launching the First for Europe branch, giving some 50 talks during the 2016 referendum, editing and writing some 600 articles for London for Europe, the New European, and other national newspapers, and campaigning, including programs with the Pakistani and Sikh communities. As Branch's Forum Chair, I played a key role in bringing some 90 local groups into the EM family and building up the national network. So what would I want to achieve as Vice Chair? Promote a European movement of values. The Lisbon Treaty in Article 2 outlines the values of the Union. Respect for values of the Union, including freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities, invoking a society in which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between men and women prevail. The EM must practice what it preaches. So I shall ensure the EM's code of conduct is implemented and principles of good governance are adhered to. Second, we need to build a movement for members and branches. There are some 13,000 EM members who are largely content to support the cause, but only participate in activities from time to time, if at all. We need to look beyond our membership to some 16 million who would likely vote to rejoin, given the right political circumstances. In particular, we need to rise above party political tribal loyalties. We shall never win if we do not embrace the 6 million conservative pro-Europeans. When we do rejoin, it will be because we have engaged them all fully. In order to do so, pro-Europeanism needs to become a way of life, not just protests and picnics. Look at the greening groups sprouting up everywhere. They organize regular green drinks, talks, cafes, protests, greening, you name it. The EM needs to dedicate more resources towards doing the same. As part of its accessible and compelling membership offer, which I shall champion, every day needs to be Europe Day. Third, recalling the People's Vote debacle and Millbank, where egos and poor governance let us all down, we need to strengthen the one pro-European organisation which has any chance of making a real impact. That is the European movement. The EM can only become our hoped-for mass movement if we have coherent national structures, not an uncoordinated patchwork of groups with different brands communicating different messages. Yet we need to embrace other groups and respect their independence. In short, there is a lot of work to do, and I hope you may support me. Thank you.
The next speaker is Sajjad Karim. So Saj, if you could give us your 4 minutes now, please.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you all, and thank you for making the time to be here. And thank you also, Mary, Paula, and Aidan, and all that Worldwide Wednesday. It's certainly a pleasure when I'm with you, and I think this is either the second or third occasion that I've had the opportunity. I've served as a member of the National Executive for the European Movement and worked very closely with a number of the people in the senior leadership. I myself am from the northwest of England. I'm a Lancashire lad. I grew up in 1970s Britain. My early growth years remember quite a regressive place, really, that needed to be brought forward. And certainly in the 1980s, I remember looking back at the 70s and wondering why we were in such a situation ever that qualified people couldn't get professional jobs simply because of the colour of their skin. And in the 80s, it was quite clear to me that one of the big areas that had pushed us forward was the fact that we had introduced legislation from 1976 onwards. And a big part of that was down to the forward-looking aspects of an organisation, a set of institutions that we as a country had chosen to join by that point, which was the European Community and latterly became the European Union. In the 80s, the United Kingdom started to reinvent itself, issues of identity, and we were moving forward. Now, in the 90s, for my generation, it was absolutely pivotal. There was two events that completely changed our outlook. One was the release of Nelson Mandela from prison, and the other was people tearing down the Berlin Wall with their bare hands. And it was quite clear that things were going to be different from that moment onwards. The canvas upon which my generation could paint their life story was just going to be so much bigger than we could ever have imagined before. Now, of course, the advent of the 90s of us joining then the single market meant that young kids from Lancashire could think beyond Lancashire and England and indeed the United Kingdom in terms of their future plans. Now, why am I telling you all of this? It's because one of the things that was fundamentally lacking in the EU referendum campaign from the Remain side was an emotional narrative. The European Union affected every part of our lives and all that the United Kingdom had become in the latter decades. But not a single one of our pro-European politicians was brave enough to take that case to the people of the United Kingdom. And that's why I start off with that message here today. I was also very fortunate. In 2004, I was elected to the European Parliament, served at the highest of levels, had some of the most wonderful opportunities there to contribute constructively and always to speak truth to power. And even after the Brexit referendum, that is not something I've given up doing. I continue to maintain that position. Now, very latterly, diversity of thought and representation is what we need within the European movement. It is a coalition of the left and the right that delivered Brexit. And we need to make sure that we once again forge a pro-European coalition.
That is the 4 minutes.
We need every pro-European
Saj, that is the 4 minutes.
Thank you, Paula.
Okay, obviously candidates will get the chance to come back to these points later on. So if I could now ask Richard to give us his 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for organising this, Hustings. It's a shame we couldn't have done it a little bit earlier in the process, but hopefully there's a few people here who haven't voted yet. When I founded Leads for Europe about 5 years ago, like many of you, I was strongly of the opinion that we were going to need 60% plus of the British public to come to the realisation that Brexit was a mistake and that we were going to need to revisit the question. And I still believe that. We're still at the 60% level and we're still not there yet. That means, from my point of view, that we as a movement need to be open to working with anybody and everybody who in any way supports the view that Brexit was a mistake, whether they're left-wing, right-wing, centrist, whether they're old or young, whether they are woke or asleep, whatever that is, whether they are a militant campaigner or an armchair observer. Now, my view was that no single body would be able to create that scale of 60% that would be able to represent that much of the British population. After all, the Leave campaign was formed of actually several campaigns. There was the Farage Banks campaign, there was the Gove Johnson one, and there was a sort of left Labour, Gisela Stewart, John Mills one. It wasn't necessary for them to be on exactly the same page. All they needed to do was to get those voters to vote in one of the two boxes to take Britain out of the EU. So applying that to our current situation, it means that the Remain, Rejoin movement has to be diverse. It has to consist of different political campaign groups, different political parties, and each having possibly a slightly different message, but possibly overlapping with each other. But I don't believe we can have a single monolithic campaign that is going to be able to do it all. Now, obviously, I'm here to support the European movement and to be vice chair of the European movement. But my philosophy throughout has been that the European movement must be willing to cooperate with and collaborate with any organisations which share our overall aim of reversing Brexit, of getting Britain closer to Europe. We cannot afford to be tribal about this. We have to be willing to do whatever it takes in terms of cooperation, collaboration, communication, and building that very broad coalition in the country at large that will get us into the European Union in the long run. So I've followed that strategy throughout my involvement with this fantastic movement. Some people have commented about me, is it acceptable for someone to be a senior position in two different organisations, even if they share exactly the same aims? I think it's a fair question, and I think the answer is yes, it is perfectly acceptable. The reason that I am involved in Grassroots for Europe, as well as the European movement, is because I believe we are stronger, these two organisations, if we stay close and on good terms, rather than if we become separated from one another. There are a lot of very good groups that are affiliated to the European movement and have nothing to do with Grassroots for Europe, and a lot of very good groups that are involved with Grassroots for Europe that are not affiliated to the European movement. And I want us all to work together. We all share the same streets, we all share the same ideas, we are friends, and we want the same things. So my view is we need to have really great collaboration between all of our groups and all of our organisations, which is why I organised in January 2020, along with the Grassroots for Europe team, the Where Now for Remain conference in London at Westminster. at that time, we were in deep shock about the 2019 general election. I feared that the movement might start to fall to bits or shut up shop, and I wanted to keep it together and re-galvanise it to keep going.
Okay, that is the 4 minutes, but obviously you'll get a chance to come back to points later. So thanks all four for really interesting perspectives. So we've had a lot of questions sent in. So in some cases, I'm having to combine the questions, and each candidate gets up to 2 minutes to answer them. And this time we're going to start with Nick. So it'll be Nick, Saj, Richard, and then Molly, if Molly's connectivity is still okay. And so the first question is, the European movement needs to work across parties and with some fairly influential people who are very connected to their parties. Can you please tell us what your party affiliations are, if you have any, and how you will manage the need to be working across parties and with people of no party affiliation? So we'll hear first from Nick.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Paula. For the sake of transparency, I'm a member of the Liberal Democrats. I have been a former chair of the Liberal Democrat European Group. As a former civil servant, I'm not particularly tribal. My pro-Europeanism is my #1 affiliation. I don't really care about which party people belong to, as long as they put their pro-Europeanism first. I think it's as simple as that. I do feel that there is a motion at the AGM about adherence to affirmation of the European movement's creed of being a movement of all parties and none. And I would certainly strongly back that motion. And I have no trouble relating with pro-Europeans from Labour, Conservatives, if there's some left. Well, there are some left. Liberal Democrats, Greens. To me, pro-Europeans, we're all on the same side.
Okay. And you came in well under the time as well, so well done. Next, can we hear from Saj?
Yes, I'm a member of the Conservative Party. I also chaired and led the Conservatives for a People's Vote campaign at quite a pivotal moment. Of course, it has meant that so far as the current leadership of the Conservative Party is concerned, I am very much regarded as persona non grata. I have no issue with that. I refuse to accept that Brexit was a properly informed choice that should be given respect without question. I don't accept that for a second. Having said that, I, of course, work with many people within the Conservative movement and indeed the Conservative Party, including the Conservative Parliamentary Party, who are pro-European in their outlook, or at the very least, very realistic about EU-UK relations going forward. I have worked previously as an MEP with governments of all colours in the United Kingdom, whether it be Labour, whether it be a coalition government of Conservative and Liberal Democrat, or indeed just a Conservative government on its own. And then, of course, at an EU level, I think it's essential that we build on all the links that we have looking forward. I have extremely good links into the European People's Party, the Social and Democrats group, and also into the Liberal and Green groups as well at an EU level. Also, a variety of governments right across the European Union, MEPs, MPs, heads of state, all the sorts of links that can be put to work on behalf of the European movement in a much more strategic way, should I be elected as one of the two vice chairmen. Of course, as a member of the National Executive, I have worked extremely hard already.
Okay, that is the 2 minutes, Saj, thank you. Okay, if we could now hear from Richard, please.
Thank you. Just to use a well-known phrase on this one, I agree with Nick. I think the priority for our vice chair, not chairman, obviously, as the comment says, vice chair, is that we put our pro-Europeanism first, and I think that I have done that. For the record, I've been a member of the Green Party for about 10 years, but I basically gave up all Green Party activity in 2017 when I got involved in Leads for Europe and the pro-European movement. And ever since then, I've dedicated myself to this cause. I think it is extremely important that we work with all parties on as even-handed a basis as we possibly can. And I've tried really, really hard during my time with Leads for Europe to maintain that balance, that we must not create an atmosphere in which any party member from any political party feels unwelcome or unable to be part of our organisation, our movement. Now, in respect of Conservatives, that's been particularly challenging because there are not that many pro-European Conservatives who are willing to raise their head above the parapet. And we have, in Leads for Europe and in Grassroots for Europe, we've really worked hard to reach out to Conservatives. At the conference I mentioned in my introductory comments, we invited Dominic Grieve to speak at the conference. Absolutely fantastic moment when he spoke and was welcomed by a huge rapturous crowd. And prior to that, in Leeds, we did a similar conference, the Great Northern Stop Brexit Conference, where Michael Heseltine addressed the audience, and again, absolutely electric atmosphere. I've also worked with, we managed to find a local Conservative Party Association chair in Leeds who spoke at one of our rallies from the platform. So we have worked really hard to be even-handed about that. We obviously also look to Liberal Democrats, Greens and Labour politicians to speak at all of our events and to try and maintain that balance. And I would say I've been kind of neutral party politically throughout, and I think
that is the 2 minutes, but obviously there'll be a chance to come back to this. So Molly, if you can hear us, do you want to give us your up to 2 minute answer?
I can hear you. I hope you can hear me, and there's not too much of the train announcer in the background. So I would just say that I agree with a lot of what Saj said, and I think as MEPs we worked together very closely. And obviously we worked to stop Brexit, but also European politics works in a different kind of way from British politics. And I think a lot of British politicians very much enjoy the chance to work in a cross-party way. And that culture has become part of the European movement, or, you know, was always part of the European movement. And I think that's a really positive thing. So I'm a member of the Green Party and have been for 30 years, actually. And so, you know, that's where my pro-Europeanism comes from, because it's very much based in the need to protect environmental standards and also the peacemaking mission of the European Union. But my view of the European movement is sometimes people say, we'll just be blind to what party you come from. You know, we're all pro-Europeans when we're here. But I actually think it's very important that we are clear. If we are affiliated with political parties, we are clear which party it is. And then we try to make sure we've got a good balance of people from different parties across the movement, and also particularly in the governance bodies. And that's something I've been working to achieve just recently. I would just say, I think the question said something about making sure that we have proportionate people from different parties in the movement or something like that. And I would just say, that to me, one of the problems with Brexit and indeed with climate is that our parliament is no longer representing the people in this country. And if we had a better working democracy, we wouldn't have had Brexit. And so while this isn't something that's central to the European movement, I do think it's important that we all work to strengthen democracy at the same time as we work to go back into the EU, even to the extent where I'm not convinced that the EU would accept us, because obviously democratic standards are crucial, and we're going to have to prove that we're democratic.
Okay, that is the 2 minutes.
So
that is the 2 minutes.
Priority as well. Okay, thank you.
So well done for battling past all the train announcements. So next question, it will be for Saj to go first. And this question is one that was sent in earlier as well. How will you persuade conservative red wall voters to join Schengen or commit to abandoning the pound?
Well, good evening, and thank you very much for that question. When it comes to not just the Red Wall, but the entirety of the electorate in the United Kingdom, there is really a huge need to carry out an exercise that properly informs people. One of the things that I often felt 20 years in European politics was that people, I'm afraid, were very much misinformed and ill-informed about the reality of what the European Union was and what it did. So the first starting point has to be to ensure that the population at large is far better informed about the realities. When it comes to Red Wall voters, and the reasons behind why so many of them voted for Boris Johnson in the Get Brexit Done election campaign, and indeed many of them voted Leave, one has to concentrate at much more domestic level politics and the reasons behind why they were voting in the way that they did. Now, that is really something that is far more complex and much more in tune with individual party politics and manifesto bases that have to be set out. Certainly, as a Conservative, I want to see my party move back into the centre-right of British politics with a very pro-European agenda. And that's certainly a message that I have no qualms about taking, not just to the Red Wall seats, but to every corner of the United Kingdom.
Thank you. If we could hear from Richard next, please.
Thank you. Speaking from West Yorkshire, where, well, I'm not in West Yorkshire at the moment, but I'm based in West Yorkshire. We've got a lot of experience of dealing with Red Wall voters. It is very challenging, and to be honest, a lot of them are not particularly receptive to any message that we might have for them, but we have to keep trying. Regarding the question of Schengen and entering the euro, I mean, I think that's a long way down the road. I think our strategy is step by step to rejoin, and I would argue that the question of Schengen and the pound comes almost after rejoin, so it's certainly at the very far end of that road. So to be raising that at the moment with Red Wall voters, I think you're on a hiding to nothing, and I would suggest that we leave that for another day. At the moment, we need to find ways of engaging with Red Wall voters that they will be receptive to. So we're talking about Brexit isn't working, we're talking about empty shelves, we're talking about jobs losses and difficulties for small businesses, importing and exporting and things like that. And they're the things that are going to get their attention. And we can fix that by, in the first instance, joining the single market and the customs union, and ultimately by rejoining. But we don't need to be provocative to them and start talking about going beyond that at this point. And I'm a firm Remainer, but I can see that tactically that's not something we are ready to talk about at this moment to Red Wall voters.
Okay, thank you. Molly, if you can hear us, do you want to give us your answer?
Yeah, I think we're in a good zone just now, actually. We have a lot of Leave voters in the part of the country I represent. They may have some similarities with Red Wall voters, but they also have differences. And my observation is most of the reasons people voted for Brexit have nothing to do with the European Union. So that's partly a mission for education, but it's also acknowledging the fact that we can't do anything as pro-Europeans about the appalling way people in a lot of our communities have been treated over the past 10 years. So how are we going to change people's views? I think through pointing out the disasters that Brexit is bringing and relating them very clearly to people's everyday lives. I do have a worry about the euro. Preserving the pound was one of the key achievements of the UK in membership of the EU, because it really did allow us to have our cake and eat it. And I speak as somebody who works on the Economics and Monetary Policy Committee in the European Parliament, and I'm not convinced we'll be able to keep the pound and re-enter the EU. So I think
Okay, Molly has
Everyone does
frozen.
deserve a lot of thought. I don't think the issues with it's a very good quest to join the euro.
Right, so I think we're losing a bit of connectivity with Molly there. So let's go on and hear from Nick.
Okay, thank you. I think this question is a little bit of a red herring for two possible reasons. I mean, first, by the time we get around to having any serious engagement of issues such as Schengen and the euro, I'd imagine the red wall will have crumbled. We would be talking about confronting these issues perhaps in a decade, and which is probably the timescale we're looking at towards serious engagement on any serious negotiation on rejoining the EU. That's the first point. The second point is, I think, also by that time, that those red wall voters who've lent the Conservatives their vote will have discovered the truth about Brexit and the fact that they've been lied to. But I also think that this question may be false in the sense that there have been psephological studies that show a lot of the voters in the red walls lent their vote to the Tories in the sense that a lot abandoned Labour towards the Greens and the Lib Dems and other progressive parties simply because they were disgusted with Corbyn. So this is a debate for Labour internal party grief, but I think the problem lies more with blaming Corbyn and the former Labour leadership rather than the Brexit issue. So if one makes a stab at it, perhaps in the future, some of those people who lent their votes to the Tories will go back to Labour. And the also thing I would point out is that there are signs that the tabloid media is shifting. The Daily Mail, for example, is turning in a big way against the Tories on the corruption and sleaze issues. So
that is the 2 minutes. That is the 2 minutes. But obviously, you could come back to some of these in your closing statement. So the next question, we will start with Richard. And the question is, as a passionate group of grassroots activists, we need a VC who's going to support our campaigns at a local level. What have you done to support local groups, and how do you see yourself working with local groups in the future? So we will start with Richard.
Thank you. Well, I mean, obviously this is the end of the business end that I come from. I started a local group myself in January 2017 with others, and I've along with others built a great team there. So I have a real understanding of what it's like to campaign on the streets. I've participated in roughly something like 100 street stalls, meeting thousands of members of the public. We know what the public are saying to us, what messages work and what doesn't work. And our frustration during the People's Vote period was that we were taking all these messages, we were learning all these lessons, we were trying to pass this up the chain to the people in Millbank, and they weren't really that interested in listening. And that's in fact why Grassroots for Europe came to life in 2018 as a means of the grassroots groups coming together and developing a common voice and giving ourselves a bit of clout that we would be able to collectively interact with the HQ and to try and get them to take on board some of the stuff that we were saying, both in terms of messaging that we were receiving from the streets, but also in terms of the skills and the expertise that we were able to bring to bear, which we felt were not being used effectively. So I feel strongly that we have a massive movement here. We've got 14,000 EM members, but the movement is potentially much, much bigger than that, hundreds of thousands maybe, if everybody was fired up. And there's a lot of skill and expertise in there that we must harness. It's not down to one person like me or whoever else wins this position to do everything. It is up to us to harness the massive potential that we have out there in the country from all of the activists, members, supporters. We need a mass movement, and we need to then really start to transform the arguments across the length and breadth of this country.
Okay, finished just ahead of the 2 minutes, which is great. Molly, if you can hear us, do you want to give us your 2 minutes? Molly, can you hear us? I'm not sure she can.
Ireland, I was very active with all the grassroots groups. Okay.
Okay, I think we're having some connectivity problems there with Molly. So if we could go to Nick for an answer, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, traditionally, one of the problems with the which is an organization which has grown extremely rapidly, and I think what we're facing is some of the challenges of growth and how we manage that, and how we improve the EM. And traditionally, the EM has been regarded as a bit of a top-down organization, but I do think we are making progress. I think staff at HQ are far more interactive with branches and local groups than they have been in the past. They have been consulting. We have been forming new mechanisms, such as the campaigns group, which solicits the views of local branches and groups about what's going out on the streets with the Brexometers and so on. And I think that is being reflected in the EM's work, but I don't think it should stop there. It's not only about listening and interacting more, it's also about dedicating more resources to local groups. And as I said, I think we have to become like greening groups and make Europe an everyday way of life. So it's not only protests, it's not only picnics, it's support for talks, it's capacity building of local groups. And I think there's a lot we can achieve together and in a two-way interaction, and I'm positive that we're headed in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. And if we could hear from Saj now, please.
Well, thank you. For many years, I've worked very closely and with a whole host of organizations, including Grassroots for Europe, both as an MEP and after having been an MEP as well. I think the issue is this: it's about reaching out to all of those people right across the United Kingdom who are not, at this moment in time, passionate enough to join up to any of these groups, whether it was Conservatives for a People's Vote or any of the other multitude of organizations that came into being immediately after the EU referendum took place. And certainly I have never shied away from taking the arguments, not just as a Conservative with a realistic approach to where we are now, to people in grassroots movements who are committed pro-Europeans like me, but possibly have a different view as to how we move forward from here. But equally, at the same time, taking those arguments into organizations and associations of people who actually favour Brexit, and putting the arguments to them about a realistic relationship between the UK and the European Union, looking ahead and as to how we move forward from where we are. I, of course, myself am a committed pro-European who believes that the position of the United Kingdom is best served by being at the heart of Europe. But the way to get back there is exactly what our logo says in the European movement, and that is step by step. We cannot simply jump back in. It's not in our prerogative to do so. We have to work with our European partners to make this happen. And I believe I've got the right network skills to act as a bridge between the UK, as a bridging force, as one of the bridging forces between the UK and the EU to bring about that step-by-step approach.
That is the 2 minutes. Now, Molly has left us for connectivity reasons, so the next question we will start with Nick. And it is a very, very topical question. It's about ethics. So the European Parliament resolved to strengthen its transparency and integrity by setting up an independent ethics body. and ethics is a big issue in British politics at the moment. What action would you take to ensure the European movement cannot be challenged when it comes to its own internal standards on integrity and ethics? So we will hear first from Nick.
Right, and I think that's the second time I've started, but no problem. I'm very keen about this question. I wholeheartedly endorse this. As I mentioned, I have felt that the European movement has to very much practice what we preach. We have to. I outlined the Article 2 of the Lisbon Treaty, espousing the values of the European Union. The European movement has to ensure that those values are adhered to in our own conduct. We have to be whiter than white if we're going to build a mass movement. I don't see why anybody would want to join a movement that isn't squeaky clean and all-encompassing, fair, and so on. I have two motions coming forward to the annual general meeting. One is on a safety valve mechanism for a senior individual, which is in line with current corporate best governance practice to ensure that any serious difficulty involved within the EM. And the other one is an espousal of the code of conduct, which I launched and had accepted by the National Executive to ensure fair treatment for people of all races, genders, and political persuasions. So I think I've been in the forefront of trying to make to improve European movement good governance and make sure that we fully adhere to our European values.
Thank you. If we could hear now from Saj.
Thank you very much, Paula. Right. I mean, I have a lot of personal history with this. In 2014, after I stood for election as President of the European Parliament, I was not successful. I was beaten by Martin Schulz. But one of the first things he did was immediately ask me to lead a committee to establish a code of conduct for the European Parliament. And this was after a sting operation had taken place and 4 MEPs had been exposed with very corrupt behavior coming to light. I then chaired that committee for some 5 years, and we did a huge amount of work in cleaning up the processes that existed. Now, one thing that's clear today about Westminster is that we clearly have a government that has very little regard for due process. And this is something that simply cannot end well. It's an appalling situation for us as a country to find ourselves in. So far as the European movement is concerned, when I came onto the National Executive, we found ourselves in a situation where it was clear that the European movement wasn't fit for purpose. If our stated aims are to form a mass movement, and fundamental reform was required. And I think all of the people that were involved in the leadership took that view. If I'm elected as vice chairman, I believe I've got a huge amount of experience and skills that I can bring that are directly relevant to both due process and code of conduct issues that can help not only internal reform, but to make sure that our outward face as a movement is very attractive to the population as a whole.
Okay, that is the 2 minutes. And if we could now hear from Richard.
Thanks. I mean, obviously, I'm very much in favour of good governance. I supported very much the reforms that were agreed at the special general meeting, which were designed to massively modernise the governance of the European movement, including bringing a lot more members into the council and not having it such a narrow, almost a closed shop that it was until then. So I'm really excited and looking forward to the new council coming on. It's going to have a lot more engaged and people from all parts of the country, and I think they'll have a big role to play in overseeing the executive and in ensuring that the highest standards are kept within the European movement, whilst we keep our eye on the ball of what we are here to do, which is to get on the streets, talk to the public, write to newspapers, lobby politicians. Now, my concern about some of the recent discussions has been that we are in danger of spending too much time looking inwards and not enough time doing that sort of thing, looking outwards. So I hope that once this annual general meeting is out of the way, that we can then put the sort of some disagreements about the constitutional matters behind us, and we can really start to get on with step by step to rejoin and really starting to grow the movement, as I said earlier, to be a massive influential force in British politics and to actually start to deliver on what we are here to do, which at the moment is to get Britain back into Europe.
Okay, thank you. The next question will go to Saj first, and it's quite a simple one. What is the selling point of the European movement? Why should people join? Saj.
Well, yeah, the selling point of the European movement is based upon a positive message that our future development is actually rooted in the last 5 decades, as opposed to the last 24 months. More and more as we move forward, people are going to understand and realize what it actually means to be outside the European Union. Even today, as I'm speaking to you, we are not completely outside the working mechanisms of the European Union because of the way in which the transition arrangements are working and the practical realities are working. So many things still are being facilitated and haven't come to an end. But when those processes do come to an end, and in particular, I'm extremely worried about what is going to unfold in Northern Ireland in the coming weeks and months, I think more and more people are going to realize that we have taken a wrong turn. And we have got to be there to give them hope that we can recover from this. We can turn this thing around. It is not gone to the extent that we as a United Kingdom cannot once again retake our place at the heart of Europe. How we go about it is the question, not if.
Thank you. And if we could now hear from Richard.
The sort of unique selling point of the European movement is that we're almost the last organisation standing as being a nationwide, membership-based, clearly pro-European, clearly anti-Brexit campaigning organisation. I think that the European movement is the only organisation which is capable of growing to be that mass membership body with 100,000 members, with the money that comes with that, millions of pounds of income, with a staff, 20, 30, 40 people instead of the 6 or 7 that we have at the moment, with the media reach that we could get from having that scale, with the potential to put pressure on politicians and to liaise with politicians, to lobby. That all requires scale that we don't have at the moment. So for me, the reason to join the European movement is to help us to build that, to get to that scale, to get to that influence, and to actually start to terrorize and frighten, not terrorize in terms of to concern the politicians, the Brexiters who have done so much damage to our country. We want to be coming up on their shoulder and making them think again because of the volume and the scale that we have achieved.
Thank you. And if we could now hear from Nick.
Okay, thank you. There's not really too much to add what Saj and others have said. I mean, we are the largest nationwide group. We have a history. We have nation builder. We have resources. We have a headquarters staff, and we are for rejoin. We have a very clear message and commitment to rejoining step by step. And like others, I'm confident we will get there, but I do believe that it will be a long, hard slog. But in sum, we are the best place to be a lead organization working with others. So I hope everybody will put renewed vigor into the EM after these elections, and once our constitutional changes are out of the way. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's going to be one more question, and then we will have the closing statements. This question will go first to Richard. And the question is, please could you explain what the slogan "step by step" means? How do you see it applying in practice? So we're starting with Richard.
Okay, I mean, step by step was to basically say that we're not going to call immediately on day one for rejoining the EU when we've only just left or hadn't even left at that point. So we were setting out various staging points that we could successfully campaign on the road towards rejoin. For example, initially we were thinking of things like Erasmus. Why not rejoin Erasmus? Beyond that, potentially, why not join the customs union and deal with the problems with Northern Ireland and the border between the UK and the rest of Europe? A lot of those problems would go away if we were in the customs union and if we had access to the single market. And then beyond that, you know, we would ultimately start to be getting closer to out and out rejoin. I think we now have an active discussion about whether we are now ready to start talking about the customs union and the single market more emphatically. And the executive are actually discussing that sort of issue at the moment, because the way that Brexit is falling apart around our ears, I think it accelerates the need for us to be more vocal and really drive home that message that Brexit isn't working and that we have a solution to that. So I think we can move a little bit more quickly along that road, step by step, to rejoin. And that's really the line that I will be taking, is let's get on with it. Let's be very clear about what we mean in terms of single market customs union and the other programs we might want to join, such as Erasmus, but let's start crystallizing what we are asking for now, and let's start rallying support for these steps on the way to, in the longer run, moving towards rejoin.
Okay, thank you. And if we could now hear from Nick.
Right, thank you. I having been with the Foreign Office, I pioneered a whole series of track 2 diplomacy discussions and reports for accession countries between 1993 and 2010. And I know what a hard slog it is for countries to get back into the EU. And I outlined that in a long article in the New European Rocky Road to Rejoin in January earlier this year. So people, if they want further detail about the challenges of rejoining, they can look at it there. I think we just have to chip away wherever we can. It's been mentioned, Erasmus is one area, working with businesses on their harmonization programs, ensuring the City of London gets as much equivalence as possible. By step, I think it's effectively just a gradualist strategy, recognizing that we just have work at several different levels. We have a campaign with the farming community, for example. I mentioned the city, I mentioned business, I mentioned educationalists. We just have to fight it little by little on every front that we possibly can. And I think some areas and campaigns will progress faster than others. But as I think the ultimate aim is that we have to try to aim, before rejoining, we have to aim for as close as possible relations with the EU as is feasible at the time. And there's a lot of work to do. It'll be very complex. It'll be very frustrating, but we will get there.
Okay, that is exactly the 2 minutes. And if we could hear from Saj.
Well, for me, the starting point is to actually recognize that today we have a government that is absolutely committed to destroying an institutionally established relationship between the EU and the UK. And a very complaint opposition is simply allowing that to happen. Now, how do we get to a stage where we once again are on the verge of rejoining the European Union? Well, the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we once again have closer relations, and as close a relationship as we possibly can. Now, what does that actually mean in practice? It means, of course, we have got to, and I would describe it as, we have to weave a web. And this is something that has to be done in a very methodological way. We have got to ensure that we are back in the single market. We have to be back in the customs union. Of course, we have to be back in programs like Erasmus, policing, European arrest warrant, space programs, innovation, patents, all of the authorities that come with that, the chemical regulatory bodies, to say but a few. But the most important point I will make is this. In order to weave that web, we have got to take the British people with us. And at this moment in time, far too many people, including Remainers, have given up. They don't believe that we can actually weave that web again. We can. We've got to give them that belief, but it's not just an emotional case that needs to be made. We've got to show them practically how we go about doing that. And that is where the personal links and relationships of those of us that are committed pro-Europeans have to be put to work in the European movement. That is the only platform from where we can deliver our ambition of making sure we are back at the heart of Europe at the end of this particular journey.
That is the 2 minutes. And thank you very much, everybody. Before we go to final presentations by the candidates, just want to apologise to anybody who sent a question in that wasn't used. We had far too many questions in to use them all, and I've tried to take a range of the questions to cover off the things that people seemed most interested in. We're now going to move to final statements from the candidates. The order will be Richard, then Saj, then Nick. So we're going in reverse order from the first time. So if I could ask Richard to give his 2 minutes, please.
Everything that I've done in the past 5 years of involvement with this broad movement has been intended to support, encourage, and inspire campaigners to get involved in whichever group suits them, as long as they do get involved and do something rather than do nothing at all. So where does that leave me with regards to the European movement? Well, as far as I'm concerned, as I said earlier, EM is the only organisation that has the capacity to grow to be a mass membership pro-EU campaign. It has the history, it has the brand recognition, it has the staff, the money, the connections and the vision to lead the UK back into the EU. And I believe that by working together, we can grow EM to be 100,000 members, which I said 2 years ago should be our goal, our medium-term goal. That would give us millions of pounds of income. It would give us groups in every part of the UK. It would give us a full team of professionals at HQ. It would give us access to the media on a much broader scale and the resulting political influence, which scares the hell out of the Brexiters. Now, in terms of EM, what we need to do immediately, the constitutional reforms are complete. So now we need to implement them and really grow the movement and start looking a lot more outwards. We need to implement them to increase our diversity, as we are in the process of doing. But then primarily we need to be getting people on the streets to be spreading our message on an increasing scale. Does my commitment to EM mean that other pro-EU campaign organisations need to be absorbed or driven out of existence? Absolutely not. I want them to flourish too, because in my view, if those other organisations are strong, then we will be strong. If they are making progress with their campaigns, then our campaign will benefit. And one day, these other campaign groups, broadly pro-European, will deliver a portion of the 60% of the British vote.
Okay, that is the 2 minutes.
That will return us to our rightful place in Europe.
Okay, so somebody is sharing their screen, which is a little bit distracting. But if the candidates don't mind, we'll move on to Saj. And if Saj, if you could give us your 2 minutes, please.
We need to ensure that the European movement has diversity of thought and representation so that it is truly reflective of British society as it is today. And then we need to make sure that we do what we can to use that as a platform to start repairing relations between the EU and the UK, which, as a statement of fact, are at the worst point ever. And we must repair those on a step-by-step approach until we're back at the heart of Europe. I hope I will bring a constructive approach to that process as well. Now, I'm somebody who is committed to a European future for the United Kingdom. I have no divided loyalties. The European movement is the way back, but a truly representative European movement that incorporates all sections of political thought in the United Kingdom amongst the senior leadership. Now, Brexit unfolded, as I said before, as a coalition of left and right. And we need to rebuild a coalition of all of those pro-European Brits, wherever they may be in the political spectrum. And we cannot do that if we exclude a big section of that political thought from the senior leadership of the European movement. So I appeal to the membership of the European movement to give me their support, or at least lend me their support. Elect me so that I can carry on working with Molly, with Andrew, with the senior leadership team, and with the membership, so that step by step, we make our way back to the heart of Europe.
Okay, that is the 2 minutes. And finally, if I could ask Nick to give his 2 minutes, please.
Okay, well, thank you. I've outlined a vision of a European movement of values, and we have to practice what we preach. I firmly believe that in order for us to succeed, we have to build a movement for members and local groups. And I also believe that strengthening our governance is still on the agenda if we are to succeed. These are elections for the European movement. I believe any vice chair should be elected on the basis of what she or he has done for the EM and what she will do in the future. And we need vice chairs who have the European movement at heart. We need vice chairs who will speak for European movement members and branches, not at them. As an all-party and no-party movement, we also need a representative range of political parties in the EM's leadership. And above all, for that reason, I believe that it's probably best to encompass the whole country by giving your top preference votes to myself and to Sajjad Karim to build that stronger movement. The receding of the pandemic gives us an overdue opportunity to campaign to say we are done with Brexit. Brexiters have taken our country back. Only our European movement in the vanguard can lead us all pro-Europeans forward step by step into the EU. So I hope all members of the European movement and all valued members of other groups can help support our shared vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody, to Molly, who obviously isn't here now, to Nick, to Saj, and to Richard. And once again, apologies to those whose questions I wasn't able to use. It just shows how much interest there is in the topic that so many questions came in. Thank you, everybody, for your time. And don't forget, polls close on the 20th of November.